that I believe nuclear war leads inevitably to mutual obliteration, and that therefore, if I was told as president that Russian rockets were speeding towards the continental United States, I would not order a response. He said, you can understand from this that I am not a candidate for the presidency of the United States. And I thought, what a good answer, you know, that he was prepared to take the premises of the question. Like the only way you can be, they're particularly asking women, are you prepared to obliterate the planet? Because if you aren't prepared to obliterate the planet, you have no right to be president of the United States. Are you ready at any time to press button A and say, wipe the whole thing out? We've had enough. Humanity can't last another 10 minutes. If the candidate, you know, particularly if it's like a woman, says, oh, actually, I think it's a bad idea to destroy the planet. I'm rather against it. Not up to the job. It's completely insane.
LJ, Georgia.
Connie, love C-SPAN. Great interview. I just wanted to ask Mr. Cockburn. Mr. Cockburn, I am really fired up about Mitt Romney. I think he could be the greatest president ever, and my hero is Ronald Reagan. My question to you is, how do you compare Romney to Ronald Reagan, and how do you think Mr. Romney will do? And hope you say he'll do well.
Oh, I don't know where you got the idea. I might think Romney will do well. I don't particularly care for Mitt Romney, and I have some very disobliging chapters about Ronald Reagan in End Times, our fine new book, in which we have a chapter, actually it was one, but most of the book is written by me or Jeffrey, on the great communicator. I don't think Reagan was a great communicator. I think his presidency was a disaster for America. I think, I've never understood how people now solemnly, there's some guy wrote an absolutely huge book the other day saying, you know, this was one of the finest political brains and one of the greatest politicians in the history of the United States. Ronald Reagan, I have it on absolutely, I think, unchallengeable authority that when he got in, he used to get briefings from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they would, you know, give him the state of play around the world. And they noticed that the president didn't seem to like this very much. In fact, dozed off as they were giving him the state of play. So they drafted in some cartoonists into a secret unit to draw in cartoon form the state of play. So there would be the Russians with enormous Zeppelin-like ICBM missiles, and on the American side, tiny pygmy-like missiles. In fact, Paul Nitze, another horrible figure in American political history, used to go around with kind of like it was like a croquet rack of these missiles to show, all of them. And it was a cartoon about the state of play, and Reagan really liked it. He'd like reruns. And that was the way he approached a lot of government. Like, I remember you'd listen to Reagan giving political, you'd say to Reagan, you know, well, given the recent history of Lebanon, and Reagan would plunge in with an absolutely fictional account of the history of Lebanon. It was enjoyable, but had no relationship to reality.
Let me read just a couple sentences that you wrote in this most recent book about, actually it wasn't about Reagan necessarily, but about people in the aftermath of his death. You wrote, I have boundless faith in the American people, but it was startling to see the lines of people sweating under a hot sun, waiting to see Reagan's casket. How could any of them take the dreadful old faker seriously?
That's kind of what I felt. I know there are great admirers of Ronald Reagan, starting with my neighbor Peter Hannaford, and I'm sorry if I seem disrespectful to the memory, but I think he was. He elevated the national fantasy. There was a tremendous, there is an element of fantasy in everything he did, and it had, like, you know, I'll give you an example, I mean, of what communicating really meant. Where, you know, when the Christa McAuliffe and the others went down in the rocket, why did they launch that rocket out of Florida on a cold and frosty morning when the O-ring was going to crack? Many engineers wrote, you know, later. I remember I wrote a column at the time, I think it was in The Nation, questioning, saying, you know, why did they NASA have to have that rocket taking off from Canaveral? Because the great communicator wanted to stand, I was at the speech, the State of the Union address or something, and he would be able to look up, you know, and point and say, up there is, I don't know, the beacon of freedom or whatever it was, and that required them to have that coincidence of time, to have the rocket taking off from Florida at a time when it was putting it in what turned out to be terminal peril. That was communicating at the level of another communication, you know, that they sent the bombers bombing Libya, so that they were doing it in time for the network news here. Of course, the bombs missed their target, which was an attempted assassination of Gaddafi, and they killed his daughter, or his stepdaughter. That was another. Everything was contrived. The way they described Reagan, the communicated conditions under which he operated, the phony speeches that he said, and it all elevated into fantasy what was actually going on in the world.
I'm sitting here looking because you said daughter, and I wanted to show
Oh,
our viewers a photo of your daughter, which I will continue to look for. Who is your daughter?
Daisy, Daisy Cockburn. She lives in London.
I'll tell you what, I'll keep looking for the picture as we take a call. Let's go to Greenville, North Carolina. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Whitelaw. I'm a third-year medical student, British-born Nigerian. I've been in the U.S. for 12 years. I saw Dennis Kucinich at the National Convention for American Medical Students, I think it was a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed with the fact that he has a fresh voice. He's idealistic, but still very practical, interested in providing universal health care, Department of Peace, generally streamlining the whole political situation, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, oil companies, and all that. Could you please talk about him? I know a caller called earlier, but you didn't address it. Thank you.
And, this is Dennis Kucinich.
Oh, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Dennis Kucinich has many views that are absolutely excellent. And I would kind of be more excited about his candidacy, except that I think a lot of people, as I said, I think earlier, felt a little burned by what he did in 2004 when he went on the campaign trail with quite a lot of support and, you know, was speaking in favor of all the things that the caller quite correctly identified Kucinich with, whether it be, you know, money only for the troops, only for fighting in Iraq so long as it goes towards bringing the troops home, whether it be for, you know, single-payer health insurance, for, you know, diminishing the militarism in the country and all the rest of it. I mean, his views are irreproachable. But does it end up with, I mean, his chances of success are slim, to put it as it's most optimistic. Does it end up with what he did in 2004, which was to go to the convention in Boston and then stand, you know, raising John Kerry's hand, the hand of a man whose views he'd been decrying, and just basically now saying, I am a Democrat first and foremost, and, you know, you don't get me, but you get him. A guy who stood in sharp distinction to almost every belief that Dennis Kucinich holds. So that's why I think I have some reservations. I'm sure he said a very fine speech to you in Greenville, South Carolina, where I have very good friends who live quite close to there, too.
Found the photo of Daisy.
Oh, you did?
How old is she?
Daisy was born in 1969.
And where does she live now, did you say?
She lives in London.
And what are her politics?
Well, I wouldn't presume to speak to politics. I think she seems to quite agree with things that I write, although, of course, she's more in an English context. But I don't believe she's a fierce conservative, put it like that.
What else do you want to tell us about her?
Well, I could go into great length to her wonderful merits. I will say that she is an exponent of the Alexander technique, which isn't a deferential nod to her dad, but is the Alexander technique, which is a form of physical therapy, which was started by a guy called F.T. Alexander in Australia at the turn of the 20th century, which is it's a form of physical and spinal adjustment, and that's her particular expertise. So she
Chiropractic?
It's not exactly chiropractor where it's sort of, it doesn't involve, as chiropractors can do, a fairly fierce laying on of hands, you know, to straighten the spine and all the rest of it. But it's a much more subtle affair of combating instinctive physical responses that cause, you know, pain or improper, you know, deployment of your body.
Next, Los Angeles. Hi.
Hi. I'm calling. I'm a Mrs. Morris, and I would like to know why you don't have Paul Finley on your program and talk about the book Dare to Speak Out, because everybody in America is not daring to speak out and about the Israeli lobby, and it's absolutely atrocious as far as I'm concerned. And it took us to Iraq, and it's a mess. And if we go to Iran, it'll be the end of the world as far as I'm concerned. And I'm 78 years old. I was born in India, and my father was a racehorse trainer there. And I really think that the Americans have got everything screwed up. And I think you should stop making everybody so unhappy. And Mr. Cockburn, I'm very pleased to meet you, and I hope that Christians, I knew the Christiansons, and I thought they were excellent, and they write in your paper. Thank you very much for appearing, because you need to be on every day as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Who are the Christiansons?
Oh, they're referring to valued Counterpunch contributors, Bill Christensen and Kathy Christensen. The Christensens both worked with the CIA In fact, Bill Christensen was a very, very senior national officer for the CIA and advised President Ford at one point. And now they live in Santa Fe. They're retired. And Bill and both of them have done, Kathy Christensen, his particular area of interest is Israel and Palestine. Bill has done many tremendous pieces. In fact, he did a piece right after 9/11, which was really saying, you know, why did they do it? His views have evolved a little in ways I don't totally agree with on 9/11 specifically. But then he wrote, I think, one of the best pieces of what are the real causes of terror. You know, right after 9/11, there was a brief moment when people said, well, hold on, why did this happen? What have we been doing in the world? There was a moment of, it seemed like it might be a moment of national self